welcome everybody to this month's edition of The Wellness Policy. My name is Wai Ting, joined as always by my co-host. I don't even know what to call you these days, Jordan. Like, you have so many hats, you have so many titles. I don't know which ones are official and which ones you just kind of, make up on the spot. But please introduce yourself, why don't you?
You could call me by my name.
Well, besides that, yes.
Well, today I'm wearing my POST wrestling hat. It's actually behind me on the door. My name's Jordan Goodman. It's good to be back. This is like the, 15th or 16th time we've done this. What a streak.
Yeah. And hope to keep it going. It just seems like maybe the rooms feel bigger and bigger. It's not unusual that we would have one guest join us for an episode, but today we actually have two guests. So it's a big full room here. First, I want to introduce to everybody Eli. He's a very good friend of mine and self-professed comedy analyst.
Yes, comedy analyst, philosopher of comedy, perhaps. I don't know, that might be a little too much, but yes, hello, welcome to everyone. I'm eager to talk about comedy.
Yeah, that's what we're here to talk about. And we even have a professional here who might be able to help us guide the topic along. Jordan, this is a person you reached out to literally just, less than an hour before?
About an hour ago. Yeah. On Twitter. Look at that.
Thanks to the power of social media, she has agreed graciously to jump on to help us navigate this big, broad topic. Please introduce her, Jordan.
At Blue Mug Therapy on Twitter herself. Sarah, she may or may not have a last name. I don't know. But we do know she's a practicing psychotherapist. Yes, Sarah?
Yes, I am.
And you're in Boston.
I am.
And
yes.
That's about all I know, except the fact that you infuse comedy, perhaps, or humor in your practice at times. Yes?
Correct. Yes, I do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to your first pro wrestling podcast.
I know. I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
How exciting. Yeah, like an hour ago, I look, there's therapist Twitter, there's pro wrestling Twitter. I came across one of her tweets and was intrigued by it. Clicked on the thing, saw that she leads with some humor in her practice, and like, hey, I got a comedy podcast in an hour. Let's make it happen.
That's how it happens. Just the magic of the internet. Here we are, yeah. So, of course, we are here to talk about comedy. I have to say, of all the episodes we've done, this one might be one of the most daunting, I have to say, because it's such a broad topic. We have so many ways we can get into it. I mean, and it's also the type of thing where, in some ways, I don't know if I want to talk about it because it's kind of like magic, There's such a innocence and just kind of a mystery to it that I sometimes wonder, is dissecting it does it take away from the enjoyment? But then I think about something like music, or something like even professional wrestling, where yes, knowing a little bit more about it might kind of rob us of a bit of that innocence. But for me, more often than not, it makes us deepen our appreciation. So I look forward to talking about the topic and learning a bit more about it with the four of you, with particular kind of leanings towards, especially, Sarah, with you here, maybe some of the, psychological effects or physical effects. And then with Elliot here, maybe talking more about maybe comedy in practice in our world and some of the maybe political issues that perhaps, comedians may face today. So maybe we should start off here with, just kind of a broad discussion about laughter and comedy and humor. They say laughter is the best medicine. And why do they say that, Sarah? What are some of the effects that laughter tends to provide people who, from an infantile age?
So you were asking about some of the psychological effects of laughter and utilizing humor. If we want to talk a little bit more on, the neurological aspect of things, like when we're laughing, we're releasing serotonin. We get all of those good, happy hormones when we're laughing, which is really nice. Makes things a lot easier if we're talking about difficult topics or if we're feeling anxious. Usually when we kind of have all of those nice hormones running through our bodies, we'll feel very relaxed, very open and easy, smiling. And then we start feeling happy. It's okay, the nice positive attitude. I can get through whatever this difficult thing is because I feel more comfortable. I like to think of humor almost like as a bridge for a lot of people, especially in therapy. It's a scary thing being like, okay, I'm going to talk about this difficult stuff that I'm going through, whether that's like trauma or grief or just the anxiety I'm feeling or my depression. And so utilizing like laughter and humor can be a really good way of showing like we can be ourselves here, and it doesn't have to be this like uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, I would almost contend that it's like, it almost feels in some ways necessary in order to try to navigate some of these, very difficult topics that I'm sure you get into.
Totally.
Now, what about like, as a form of communication in itself, from the time, again, that we're babies, I mean, babies use laughter along with crying, along with screaming to, perhaps communicate with their parents. And it's something that I guess we tend to carry across even into adulthood, as laughter helps us bond, helps us relate. Perhaps we typically laugh with friends, or even encountering a stranger in a room who happens to make us laugh. We might be more likely to like that person. It can be an indicator of intelligence or a sharing of a similar life experience. Eli, do you kind of have any thoughts about maybe the importance and why we laugh in a maybe sociological sense?
Yeah, well, sort of building on what Sarah was saying, I would say laughter and humor are tremendously important to well-being and feeling good. Generally, people feel good while they're laughing and after they laugh. So there's a pretty direct connection there. So finding the humor in things, finding the humor in life, especially difficult moments, even traumatic moments, I'd say is essential to feeling whole and complete and good as a person. Again, I'm not a professional, these sorts of things, but I've just noticed even from my own private practice, I guess, my own life and background, that has sort of been the case. I actually wanted to build on something you said at the start, Wai, when you were talking about how sometimes dissecting comedy can lead to difficulties unto itself. I don't know, does everyone here know the whole frog comedy thing? Is that familiar with anyone?
No.
It's a common saying. Again, there's different versions of it. I'll attempt one here. That dissecting comedy can be like dissecting a frog, in that you can try it, but you might kill the thing in the process. That's actually you'll see versions of that online. There's actually a comedy book by this guy named Mike Sachs, who went around and interviewed different comedy people, including I believe Conan O'Brien and various other writers, Robert Smigel, who worked with SNL for a long time and I think still does on a level. And that the title of the book was Poking a Dead Frog, because he was trying to ask people about comedy and how it's made, how it comes together, but while acknowledging that sometimes in trying to dissect it, we can kind of lose it, just in the sense that I find it's often very mysterious why something is funny. I myself have been in many situations where I've laughed and I go, I don't even know why I'm laughing. Sometimes I'll be in an inappropriate situation, and I'll be laughing or quietly inside, maybe finding it funny and going like, this isn't really that funny, but for some reason I'm finding something funny here. And so it's hard to explain. So that's the whole thing about the frogs, is that you can try to dissect it. You can try to figure it out, jokes or frogs alike, but you might not quite do it in the process, or you might end up just killing the thing, or it's hard to explain sometimes. Comedy is as the way it's suggested, a mysterious force, I would say.
Well, perhaps to follow a thread that you introduced, Eli, I often or sometimes humor or laughter or comedy could be some protective response or defensive response.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, I'm a practicing psychotherapist as well, and sometimes I'll have clients reveal to me that because it's uncomfortable or too vulnerable or scary to be a bit more honest in sharing or relating to someone, that often they'll use humor as a way to soften it. Or sometimes maybe they're feeling something uncomfortable. This happens to me as well too. I'm just as human. Maybe I'm feeling something that's a bit overwhelming, and I may smile or laugh as some sort of unconscious response, because maybe that is a bit too overwhelming for me to really handle or take on or process in that moment. But I think more generally what we're capturing is that whether we're talking about humor or laughter as a response, like these are very like primal things within us. It is a very primal response. And this conversation is very similar to one that we had last year around the concept of play more generally. And often infants and young children, it's more natural often for them to be playful or to laugh and things like this. I think as a culture, as a society, oftentimes we tend to beat that out of us, where we feel like we need to button up or to become more mature or to become more professional in certain respects. And when I share drum circle programs with adults, oftentimes it is my aim to at the top of a program to do icebreaker activities, to kind of give permission to everyone that I'm working with to perhaps let go of some of that judgment, to let go some of that rigidity in how we're presenting. So maybe they feel a bit more comfortable laughing. They may feel more comfortable being silly or being playful. Because to Sarah's point, when we are engaging in that way, we tend to let our defenses down a bit in a way that helps us be more open and receptive to interacting and feeling connected to not only ourselves, but to other people. And in a sense, this stuff, whether it's laughter or comedy or humor, when we're using it effectively, it can act as like a lubricant for life, or as a lubricant for our experience in ways that we can bond with other people. Not unlike most parents or anyone interacting with an infant or a baby or a young child, often they're looking to get a laugh out of them, because that'll get a laugh out of them as well when you're interacting in that way. And like, it feels good.
Yeah, no, I would say humor plays a big role in establishing social bonds and strengthening them, because when you're laughing with someone, you're getting along with them. I don't know if there's been any situations in human history where two people are laughing and angry at each other. I mean, they might be angry at each other for other reasons, but at least in that moment, it's a great way of diffusing and relieving tension. I would say that's probably why people go to comedy in the first place, why they attend comedy events. They want to let loose. They want to feel good. They want to relieve and break some tension. So I would definitely say, yeah, comedy plays a massive role in diffusing and relieving tension in people and in society more generally.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really like about utilizing it in therapy, is because, one, it's meeting a client where they're at. So if I have somebody who comes to me and they utilize humor, like Jordan was saying, is like a defense mechanism, or like we've all kind of been mentioning, like this is a way for me to protect myself. It's like, okay, so like, let's use that language, like how you talk about this thing, where is it coming from? And how can we use that to kind of get underneath what's actually happening? But we're doing it in a way that's more comfortable, right? I'm not going to call someone out, like cold call them and say, like, you're using your humor as a way to avoid something. Like, that's not going to make them feel good. Like, I'm going to say, like, tell me a little bit more about that. And I might like also act in a way that's like kind of silly and goofy, because one, that's who I am as a person, and clients want to see that, like me being my authentic self. But also, again, it's kind of like, okay, how do we break the ice a little bit and make this more palatable to talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it plays a huge role in all that. Absolutely.
Sarah, I'm curious about your journey as a clinician, feeling more permission or more comfort, infusing or injecting, your own sense of humor in the work. Was that always something that you had a vision for and you felt permission to do? Or when you were, a younger clinician in training, did that feel unprofessional?
Yes. So when I first started, I had a general idea of how I wanted to be as a therapist, but I didn't know how to get there, because all of what I had been told and taught was almost like the blank slate therapist. So the client comes to you and you are a blank slate. You're just there to receive whatever it is that they're going to give you and reflect it back to them. And as I kind of gained more experience and started meeting new supervisors and different clinicians, I was kind of like, all right, that's bullshit. It doesn't work for me, so I'm not going to use it. One, because I don't feel good about it. Like, my presence doesn't feel good in the therapeutic space as a therapist. And also, like, I don't think it's really helping, like not with the kind of clients that I was working with. And I have like a pretty like goofy, silly, sometimes sarcastic sense of humor. And I wanted to use that as a way to also relate to my clients. Like, it's like, I know where you're coming from. Like, I know what this is and what this looks like. And so I see you when I hear you. And how are we going to use this? And so now I just feel so much better and much more confident in my therapeutic practice because I'm able to bring that into the session and kind of like diffuse everything and use it appropriately. Like if somebody's going to be talking to me about trauma that they've experienced, I'm not going to be like, hey, finger guns, that's a big oof. Like that's going to make someone feel terrible. So it's like finding that balance of like, okay, we're going to like sit with this. We're going to acknowledge it. Like, let's process and talk about this. And then if it comes up further on down the line and we've gotten to that space of like fully processing, maybe we'll toss in a little bit of sarcasm here or a little dark humor there because like, okay, we understand what this means. And also you're able to articulate to me, this is something that hurts me, or this is something that makes me feel unsafe. So we know that we have that language. So can we utilize it? And if we can, okay, let's incorporate the humor as a way of moving through it. If that makes sense.
Totally. And I think the key is intentionality, having the sensitivity to know when it may be more helpful or not, more appropriate or not. And the times in which we are utilizing it or engaging in a more humorous way, how aware are we that that is what's going on behind the scenes of our own experience?
Yeah.
Right. Like I love, I tend to think of myself as a relatively funny guy as well. And part of perhaps the tight wire act of humor comedy is that it's not always going to work. And you're kind of flirting or dancing with some sort of edge. And sometimes we may step over that edge. Now, maybe that's in the context of a famous comedian going too far and offending a wide swath of the population. Or it's you and a friend, and you may say something that you intend to be funny, and there may be a particular sensitivity for that person. But I think part of one of the reasons why humor is such a bonding agent is because there is that vulnerability that this may not work. And therein lies a sense of trust amongst you and the person you're engaging with. So to me, that and this really stumbled upon me as an insight about a week ago when Wei and I were chatting about potentially having this public conversation. And for me, I realized the people that I cross that line with the most, that means that I really trust them. And when this is happening, I feel a greater sense of intimacy with that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, last thing, Wei and I met back in school years ago, and I think almost immediately realized we have a similar sense of humor, or he gets when I'm joking, I get when he's joking. And I realized that to me is very foundational to friendship in general. I've met many people throughout my life, and maybe yourselves as well, where I've tried the same rapport and it just doesn't really work. And hopefully it's not offensive to them or harmful, but I can just tell like they don't really get what I'm getting at, and vice versa. So I just know that we'll probably never be that close in terms of friends, and we'll hopefully be civil and stuff. But yeah, no, I think it's a very foundational friendship. And as you're saying, a good trusted friend will know when you're kidding, and we'll be able to tell more than say someone else. And yeah, once again, it strengthens the bond of the friendship even.
Totally. And I'd go a step further of saying whether it's a close friend or even, someone like Sarah or I working within a therapeutic context of a relationship, like if it does cross the line, a healthy relationship, the other person would feel safe enough to be honest about that and have an honest, direct conversation about what's actually happening in the room between two people.
Yes, actually, I've presented jokes I've come up with. I'm a bit of a practitioner at times. I've come up with jokes and I've presented them to Wei, and sometimes he thinks they're funny and laughs, and other times he'll say, I don't know if that one would really work. And he'll give me honest feedback as a friend. He'll try to tell me how he thinks it might go down. in let's say a more public situation, say like a comedy club or any other sort of room. And I really appreciate that feedback. And many times he's right, and he'll point out something that maybe should be adjusted, or a sensitivity that perhaps I hadn't thought of. And yeah, that's also a big part of friendship as well.
Sarah, you had mentioned perhaps even, making some use of dark humor in some of your sessions. And to me, like from a maybe psychological standpoint, that might be the most fascinating use of it, because, how the line between a tragedy and what might be comical, they seem so opposite, yet at the same time, they seem so incredibly close. How do you gauge that sensitivity, and why do you find it important to be able to joke about some things that might be darker?
Yeah, I usually try and go by whatever it is that's going on with the client. So if dark humor is coming into the space, it's usually happening because I know the client well, like we've already built rapport and they trust me and I trust them. Because as a clinician, because we are mandated reporters, if somebody's talking about like suicidality, for example, I have to take that really seriously. But I'll have clients who have, and like, I guess like trigger warning. So just somebody, like people to be aware, talking a little bit about suicidality and death. But like I've had clients be like, oh, I could just die right now. Or like, oh, I'm going to kill myself. Things like they'll say that in session, but it's like, I know your history. We've been working together for a very long time. So I know you're not being serious. And this is your way of like articulating that this is really difficult for me and this is really hard. And we can use that. Like, that's a tool. Like, okay, you're telling me something about like what's happening in your life. So it's like, tell me a little bit more about that. Where is this coming from? What's happening there? And it'll usually be like very dramatic, like lots of eye rolling and things like that. And then the language of like, kind of thing, which is like, okay, I can read that and we know what that means. And so I always kind of look at it as like, okay, we're utilizing this as, again, like a tool. Like, what is this telling me? Where is this coming from? And let's explore this. And this will usually be, and this is something I've only noticed in my practice. So I'm not saying that this is like for all clients, but a lot of people who have managed trauma and grief will bring a lot of that kind of humor into session. And so I always love having those conversations of like, no, but like, actually, where is that coming from for you? And like, what does that look like? And a lot of my clients though will be very sweet and they'll like, kind of go through their whole spiel. And then they'll be like, I'm just kidding, by the way, like, I'm fine. And I'm like, yes, I know. Thank you for reaffirming that. I appreciate it.
Actually, yeah, I just remembered something actually, and I don't know, maybe Sarah, you're familiar with this as well. Sure. Sigmund Freud, very famous psychologist, was fascinated by humor as well.
Yes.
And he wrote a book that I read years ago. I don't remember every single detail, but it was called, I believe, The Joke and Its Relationship to the Unconscious. That was one translation. I mean, he wrote, I believe, in German exclusively, so I think that was a translation from that. But yeah, I read an English translation of it, and he goes into how a lot of humor comes from some mysterious place in the unconscious, and even very dark places, and the sort of relationship between the two. So you're familiar with the work, I guess, or you've heard about it.
Yeah. So I'm like, I've at least heard of it. And I do know that Freud like was very interested in humor and like would tell jokes and stuff like during his own session.
Yeah, exactly. So humor and psychotherapy, they've been together for a long time. Yeah. And probably even before the profession originated. I've heard theories like in terms of, like anthropologists or whatever, trying to figure out like, why do we laugh? Like where does humor come from? Like on a biological level. And I've heard arguments that say like, well, maybe back, thousands and thousands of years ago, it was a way of sort of signaling that everything was okay. Like maybe its evolutionary purpose is to say, all clear, we're all good. The danger is past. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is with us to this day. So I found those sort of explanations interesting. Yeah,
it is. It's really cool thinking about like the evolutionary aspects of things and like why, like emotions, for example.
Yeah, why are they even there? Yeah,
exactly. Like for people who feel anxious, and it's like, why do I feel anxious now? Like if the idea is I was feeling this way because like, there's some kind of predator in the dark or something like that. And it's like, well, it served a really important purpose. And I think
it keeps you alive.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And like as social creatures, we're all about creating bonds and becoming closer. Mm-hmm. And so this is like that evolutionary aspect of it, of like, this is how we create community.
Exactly. Yeah.
Also, from an evolutionary perspective, if we take the time and consider like what is this? Like, what is life? What is this experience? Like, we will die. Like, this won't be permanent. It's absurd. You know, like the more we think about these things, just the nature of being, there's an inherent absurdity to it. And I think also just humor acts as some sort of like release valve of some things are just too incomprehensible or too unbearable or painful that sometimes we need to poke at it or be able to give ourselves permission to laugh at something just to hold on, just to cope.
I've heard things like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, kind of thing, depending. So it's in some extreme situations, it might be one or the other. And I've certainly been in places in my life where it's like, I have to laugh at this. If I don't laugh at it, it might be too hard to bear at times. So, and I don't feel like I've even been through as much as, say, some other folks. Yeah.
And culturally, I certainly found it interesting. I guess for me, what really sticks out in my mind in the States was 9/11. And at the time, I was in high school. And I remember maybe the first live SNL. And it was this idea of like, when can we laugh again? When is it appropriate? When is it culturally appropriate or not to be able to laugh again? And look, there's no right or wrong answer, and to each their own with that. But it's certainly an interesting question. I want to direct attention to the comments, and perhaps we'll hear from him a bit later on. But Asher generously shared, as a Jewish person and also as I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor, I make a lot of dark jokes about the Holocaust. And this was certainly something that Wei and I touched upon last week, and maybe an interesting direction to go in the chat. This idea about who has the right, perhaps, to say certain things or to make fun of certain things. Oftentimes the ways in which we identify, whether it's race or religion or sexuality or gender, oftentimes we may feel more permission because we identify in these ways. And look, I know for me, I'm a Jewish person as well. Give me as much of the Larry David Jewish humor or the Adam Sandler Jewish humor or Seth Rogen. Like, I love that a lot. And I love joking about Jewish humor. To me, it's like genuinely funny. But if it's a non-Jewish person doing a 15-minute set on the Holocaust, I'm not so sure about that, to be honest.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because this person is not from your group, from your background, your experience, and you probably are immediately defensive and thinking, what is this person's intentions? I'd say intentions in decoding humor and interpreting it. I'd say intentions are a big part of it. I mean, part of why I've been able to joke about certain things with Wei, for example, is that he knows me, he knows I'm kidding, he knows I'm just trying to be funny or something, and so he understands when my intention is good or just trying to be funny. But if I were to say certain things or like attempt jokes around people who I don't know, they might go like, "What has this happened?" And that's happening. My full disclosure, I have done stand up many times. And I'm not a professional, but again, I call myself a practitioner. I've done it, and I've had many experiences where it did not go down the way I hoped or I would have preferred, because I think people doubted my intention. I trend towards dark humor myself. I currently work as a news professional, so I'm exposed to a lot of really disturbing information through the news. And I have a project that I can talk about a little later related to that. So yeah, I think I trend towards dark humor because of what I've been exposed to through my job and other things. But yeah, not everyone understands that. Not everyone gets that. And they're always maybe questioning intent. Like, what is this person really trying to say? And actually, one more thing about in terms of dark jokes involving subjects like the Holocaust, there was actually a documentary I saw years ago. I believe it's called The Last Laugh. I saw it at the Hot Docs Film Festival here in Toronto. And it goes into this very topic in some depth. And they actually interview Mel Brooks, Sarah Silverman. I don't know if Larry David was in it, but they go into like, how far can you take a joke about something like the Holocaust? How much is appropriate? And the documentary was excellent. It was about 2 hours or so. And so I don't know if it would be available on streaming platforms. I hope so. But I believe it was called The Last Laugh. If anyone were to Google that to watch more of that. And there's actually examples of like attempts at humor sort of involving something as horrible as the Holocaust, and you be the judge of whether it works or not. Sarah Silverman, for example, tells a joke. She herself is Jewish. people laughed, but I could also not blame them for not laughing, and I'm not going to do it because I'm not her and I'm not Jewish. So I just watch the film and decide for yourselves, but I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah. It's a topic that I think anybody listening to a joke about their own background by somebody who's not of that background and presumably not of a similar understanding of maybe what for instance, what Jordan, your people might have gone through. You're right to be skeptical, but in the field of comedy that is so much reliant on just the freedom to be able to talk about anything, should we be limiting people from what they can or can't talk about based on their lived backgrounds? I don't know. It's a debate, of course, that is very much in the news right now and constantly kind of dominating the maybe comedy spheres. Do any of you guys have any thoughts? Maybe even before we get to you guys, some very kind of notable examples recently. Of course, Chris Rock and Will Smith, that in and of itself, Will Smith not very happy, of course, of a joke about his wife's baldness that Chris Rock may or may not have been aware of is due to an illness. And also Dave Chappelle, also a comedian who was recently attacked on stage. I mean, for reasons that aren't necessarily similar to this, but I think for me, what's most interesting about him recently is that he's been very much in the news for, what are jokes and material that may have been deemed to be transphobic by the trans community. And it ended up becoming this kind of huge issue, and still is an ongoing huge issue between Netflix defending Dave Chappelle and Netflix's own employees holding walkouts. And the questions continue to be, and I can see the arguments from both sides. Should comedians be restricted from talking about certain things? And should comedians have a responsibility of making sure that their words aren't necessarily contributing to more harm? Do you guys have any thoughts?
I can go first if you want.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, Wei and I have talked about this off air and stuff quite a bit, and I think about it a lot. I think one has to be very careful. This is part of what makes comedy tricky is you have to say it right. That's really it. I mean, if you're doing a joke on stage, and especially in front of strangers, it is crucial, and I speak from experience, it is crucial to get the words right, to get the tone right, to even get the timing of the evening right. There's so many factors that go into play. And I think what often happens, especially at like a lower level of professionalism, like people say, like open mics. I encourage everyone, by the way, to like check out an open mic in your city sometime if you live in a big city. If you're not used to say like, if you all you've seen is sort of like Netflix professional produced stand-up comedy, it's very different. You'll see a lot of people attempting stuff that they barely know what to do with, and it's very clumsy at best, but sometimes downright offensive and shocking at worst, because the people, they don't know what they're doing. It's like they're playing with fire. And so they'll go to very dark topics and not know how to handle them with any sort of sensitivity or grace or even humor. Like they don't make it work. So I think one has to be very careful. But I will also say that I personally will generally defend the right of comedians to make the attempt. And because I think the payoff, if they get it right, can be tremendous. Like if a person successfully finds humor in something dark or awkward, I think we all benefit. By realizing like, oh, maybe that scary, horrible thing isn't so bad after all. But it's a tricky thing to accomplish. And I've sort of said like, it's like black belt level stuff, like in comparing it to martial arts, like, only the best can really pull it off. And I'm not claiming I can, because again, I've attempted darker jokes on stage in front of people that just did not work out. And I went, okay. And then I feel like a jerk because I don't think I have the skill to do it yet. Maybe one day. So I will defend the attempt, but I also understand that it's a conversation, and it's taking place within society. So I would say everyone in society has the right to say their own piece and to comment upon it, and to even to aggressively denounce it and say that wasn't cool at all. So I defend everyone's right to expression, I suppose, in that context.
I tend to agree with you, Eli. And very much for similar reasons to, I think, what we were talking about. The ability to be able to navigate difficult topics using comedy, I think, is really important to have. Of course, we do have to talk about the effects of certain jokes on communities, and whether or not I do think ultimately though, like, you know, comedians should be aware, especially if you have the platform of somebody like a Dave Chappelle, of maybe what exactly you're contributing. I definitely agree with maybe fighting for the ability to attempt it and to be able to freely navigate the topics, but after it's out there, after receiving, you know, certain backlash from people in marginalized communities, what is the appropriate response? And I don't necessarily think it's as simple as, is it funny? Because I you know, like it can be a bit more complicated than that. What's interesting about Dave is that he himself walked away from Chappelle's show when he realized that his sketches may be, you know, perpetuating racial stereotypes rather than just satirizing them. And he's shown, like, you know, a great deal of awareness, you know, as it relates in that regard. Is this similar? And what makes it different now?
Yeah, I want to let other people talk too. But I was going to say, yeah, as I said before, I think it's a conversation, and Dave did a recent special that dealt with trans issues, and there was a very full-throated response to that continues to this day. And I believe he has made his own responses. I see it as a back and forth. To me, like a healthy, sort of free, open society should have that back and forth, and no one really has the last word per se. It should be a conversation. And again, I was very curious, even though I'm not a trans person myself. I was very interested to hear what the trans community thought about his special. And again, many did not like it, and others were more indifferent. And so it's to me, it's a conversation that's taking place within society, and the comedian is simply part of that. But sorry, I'll let others go too.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you have any thoughts. Sarah, like, you know, outside of your usual practice, like, do you partake in any sort of viewing of maybe stand-up comedy yourself? Like, have you tried it yourself? You seem to be somebody with a, you know, very lively personality who I think would do well.
Oh, thanks. And no, actually, I've never done any kind of like stand-up or anything like that. I'm far too anxious to do that. But like around my friends, like I would say that like I'm probably like the funny one, quote unquote, because I just like to be silly. I'm a huge fan of John Mulaney, actually. So I watched like all of his specials. I've seen him live, like huge fan, like, obviously, there was a bunch of stuff that happened with him that I have a lot of feelings about, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, like that kind of sense of humor I like really enjoy, where it's like very kind of like self-deprecating and sort of just like, okay, I'm going to put myself out there and just like talk about my day-to-day things and like create a narrative or a story around that experience. I will say, as somebody who does work with like the queer community, humor around like queer identity has been something very challenging to kind of navigate. I can't speak directly to stuff that has gone on within the trans community, just because I haven't worked with anyone that has had opinions or thoughts about that. But I do have like other queer clients that will talk about like bullying that they've experienced, and, you know, bullies playing it off as like being humorous or being funny. And sort of like a dehumanizing aspect to that. So I always feel like there is this like very interesting balance of kind of like things that are like funny and, you know, might like kind of like get a laugh, but what are like the social implications to that, I guess?
Yeah, well, that actually, I think that gets into sort of the darker side of humor, in the sense that it can be used to belittle and mock, and it can hurt people's feelings. I mean, if a person is the subject of a joke that they don't get or they don't appreciate it, it can be harmful. And I would never deny that. I mean, I've been made fun of myself growing up. I mean, I think probably almost everyone, except the like very handsome, wealthy people, and beautiful, handsome, wealthy people, I think maybe didn't have to deal with anything, but yeah, like I think everyone's had moments where they didn't appreciate being made fun of, and it does hurt. So there is a responsibility there. In terms of Chappelle, I think that's how his special was interpreted by many, that it was mocking or belittling. However, I watched it myself, and what's interesting is that, again, I don't know if I'll ever be able to understand not being trans. I remember watching the special and going, like I was trying to figure out what might have been the bullying component. But I know that I'm not even really qualified to answer that. To me, it seemed like he was trying to reach out to them to some degree, but I'm saying that as a cis male, so I respect their perspective, and I'm very eager to hear. I think comedy is so interesting in how much the diversity of reactions it provokes in people. And I'm very, like, even with my own humor that I've attempted or with strangers or with friends, I'm always very interested to hear, like, sometimes I'll try a joke that will work with some people and it will not at all with others. I'm like, okay, why did that happen? And so it's mysterious once again, but yes, but humor can hurt people's feelings. And if it's not received properly, and I would never doubt that myself.
When I was maybe 10 years old or a bit younger, I was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. And my presentation of that historically has just been what we call motor tics, where I will physically move my body in some way that is a bit irregular and not always controllable. But as a culture, when many of us think of this, we think of what's often depicted in culture of someone who has no control over the words that come out of their mouth. And when I was I don't remember exactly when it came out, but maybe a teenager, South Park did an episode where Cartman intentionally presented as someone with Tourette's. And I don't even remember the narrative and what, like, the lesson or the punchline at the end may have been. But he was someone, like, giving himself permission because of this diagnosis to just curse at will publicly. Yeah. And for me at the time, and this is the first time I've shared publicly, but I don't even really share with friends that this is part of my identity and experience, because quite frankly, as I've gotten older, it's become such a minor and mild feature of my experience, and I really, it's not something I like actively identify with or really think about. But as a kid, very much so. And also as a kid, the presentation of the tics was a bit more than mild. And at times it was deeply uncomfortable. So I loved South Park. I've always loved South Park. So now there was an episode where I felt like I was the butt of the joke. And not only that, it was this, cultural caricature of the diagnosis that I became part of my identity to some degree. But now it's being put on this, like, extreme, I don't know if pedestal is the right word, but it's an extreme example. So if I were to share with someone I have Tourette's, well, then they may automatically assume, well, that, like, at any given moment, I just may say, like, piss and motherfucker, right?
Right.
And that wouldn't feel good. And so in a way, it was like, was South Park perhaps putting me in a position to experience more ridicule or more bullying behavior or more shame about my condition. And I remember it felt like a gut punch watching that episode, but at the same time, it was funny to me. And I love South Park, and context is key. So I understood, because I had a more accurate understanding of the show and its culture. They make fun of everything. So it wasn't a personal attack on me. That's just what they do. And I think because I understood that contextually, I gave them more permission to take the punches toward me. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that multiple things can be true at once. We could both feel a bit insecure and maybe a bit singled out or attacked and a bit bad, but we may also feel it's funny. And we could also feel that person has permission to do it as well. And I think when we have these conversations, and especially as much of it plays out in a medium like Twitter, where it's not conducive to nuance, the context is always key. And perhaps some comedians, like a Howard Stern, I think he gets away with way more. But as a culture, we have this understanding, well, that's his shtick. That's what he's been doing for decades. So maybe a newer entertainer or comedian couldn't say or do some of the things that a Howard Stern could get or do or say, for better or worse. And that all can be discussed or debated or argued. But I think that's kind of the point. having a conversation like this, especially in a public forum, that is kind of the point, I believe. And I think at a certain point, we realize to look for all or nothing or black or white or yes or no conclusions may not be the most wise aim as a solution.
Eli, I just want to cut you off for a second because I know, Sarah, you're going to have to get out of here very shortly.
Yes.
Before you get a chance to do that, do you have anything you want to plug where people can follow you? You've been great on the show, and we thank you for your time.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for having me. This has been so cool. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about humor and therapy and sort of how it can be like a really useful tool. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Blue Mug Therapy, all one word. I also have an Instagram. It is also at Blue Mug Therapy on all the things. And I guess like my credentials, I'm a licensed mental health counselor out of Massachusetts. So if anybody's just kind of like, is she legit? Yes, I'm legit.
We will have links to all of that in the show descriptions. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
It was lovely to talk to you. Thank you for contributing and for talking with us. It was great. I learned a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eli. Yeah, thanks, Jordan, for reaching out and for asking me to be on the show. This is so cool.
What a Thursday.
I know, for real though. This is great. I loved it. This was awesome. So thank you so much, everybody. It was so nice meeting all of you. And I'm very excited to be able to kind of watch it later and send it to all of my friends to be like, look what I did.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Cool. We'll be in touch, Sarah.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Eli, please finish your thought.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was going to say, well, Jordan was talking about how a lot of things involving humor are not black and white. And I would say that's exactly why it can be so controversial, because there's a lot of gray in the world. I would say, from my perspective, my vantage point, things are very murky sometimes. And I think humor is an attempt to explore that murkiness and try to sort of find some shapes amongst all that. And South Park is one example of a show that's attempted that for many seasons. And, I've heard the saying equal opportunity offender, meaning that, yes, they go after everyone. And perhaps in your experience, one thing, I remember that particular episode. I haven't seen every episode of South Park, but I did watch more regularly when I was younger. I believe part of the complaint there, and other people who have had Tourette's have said that it wasn't maybe an accurate representation, that Tourette's is not actually just like cursing off the top of your head at random. It's actually a little more complicated than that, or very different. So I think sometimes, and maybe this was your own reaction, Jordan, that you felt maybe misrepresented, like this, that's not actually what I'm going through, and you're making it sound like this is what I'm going through when it's not the case. Yeah.
And I suppose this is part of the fault of, I think, just maybe a lack of representation in general across media. But to me, one of the issues is the fact that it's only something like a South Park that might be bold enough to even, mention the idea of Tourette's. And because South Park is a comedy show, you're going to get a comedic representation of what that illness is. And
yes, an exaggeration. A lot of comedy is exaggeration.
Exaggeration, yeah. Now, is it better that we don't talk about Tourette's at all, like other shows and other genres, and just kind of like keep it hidden? I don't think so. I think ultimately being able to at least be exposed to the idea of what something like that is, hopefully is healthy. Of course, when it becomes the only representation of what that thing is, or if they do a Chinese stereotype on that show and there are no other Chinese people that somebody might encounter in their daily lives, I mean, that can be problematic, of course. But I think it's also a reminder for us not to necessarily look at comedy as our main source of, what reality might be.
Actually, on that note, what did you think of the City Beef characters?
The Shitty Walk characters?
Well, yeah, I'm just curious, how did you feel about that? Not to put you on the spot, but
I thought it was hilarious. But I mean, it was hilarious and offensive at the same time, which is, I think, how most people may feel if they see themselves reflected in, a parody version on South Park. Yeah. I mean, you don't just have to look at Shitty Walk, but like really across, like even for professional wrestling, for like, depictions of Asians that, for me, the issue is when that's our only representation,
Yes. Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry.
It's one thing if, like we have, like, if we had back then, other real role models to look towards. But for a long, long time, I mean, it was only comedy characters or,
or William Hung. I remember you were telling me that
or William Hung. Setting us back decades.
I remember thinking that. I remember William Hung just being sort of like a pop culture character of sorts, a real person, obviously. But I remember you saying that, like, no, at one point, like, William Hung was kind of it for Asians in American popular culture, and that you were really annoyed by that.
Yes, absolutely. So now, do I blame South Park for that? Like, it's not their fault that we don't have any other, Asian representation in, like, across media. They just wanted to tell a joke. So, I mean, I maybe as a defense mechanism, like from a very young age, I kind of learned to take everything in stride and not get too offended by most. And I'm not expecting, a similar thing for anybody else that's, being lampooned, across comedy. But I ultimately feel like it's healthier to, especially when you're realizing that you're watching comedy, to just accept it as comedy.
Right. And actually, sorry, not to keep going on about William Hung, but what's also funny is that William Hung is a real person who I believe is like that. So
sure.
It's like, so
no
it's like,
fault on him. It's the presentation
him.
Of him.
Yeah. But I think your beef was that, well, there's a lot of different people in the Asian community. They're not, William Hung is I guess a type of person you can find in Asian communities, but there's others too. And actually, I would say, not to flatter you too much your way, but I would say you're contributing to the change in that you're somewhat of a public figure with what you do with Post, and you're showing that, like, yeah, there's Asian people who do this too. And I mean, that sounds almost corny, but yeah, like you're a part of the change, man. I'm not even saying that as a joke, as your friend, but no, you are. You're contributing. You're diversifying the landscape just by doing what you're doing.
Hell yeah, represent Wai Ting.
Yes, there we go. I don't even have a Wai Ting shirt. I should have one. I feel like everyone's got a Wai Ting shirt with me.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate that, Eli. Now, at this point, we do want to open up the conversation to anybody else that's in the room right now who wants to say something. Hansi, I know you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute and feel free to join in on the conversation.
I came here a little bit late. I've been here for last 20 minutes or so, and I'll listen back to the previous, but I'll just go. I don't want to go on a whole tangent, but because a lot of this comedy stuff is kind of complex, and I've kind of obviously I'm not an official comedian, whatever, but I've been in the comedy world in the sense that I was kind of part of the Howard Stern, so I had a study from the thing is being an ignorant person and not consuming political stuff. I only consume stuff through entertainment, unfortunately. So it never gave me a serious lens of if you're making a stereotypical joke, how offensive can it be when it's always been normalized within all of our comedy and all that. And I think honestly, and now seeing the trajectory of where a lot of comedians go, where it goes, not even about the jokes, because whenever anyone brings up Howard Stern blackface, right? Even though those don't age well, there's always going to be an argument about, well, hey, listen, man, it's under the comedic tropes. But my whole take has been that even these obvious racial things that go on within comedy, those are the obvious obvious cultural war shit that everyone's gonna argue about. When my issue with Howard, especially other comedians as well, it's not that they're jokes, but they gain a reputation for having jokes, but then when they're being serious, for example, one time Howard advocated for everyone to be racial, to be profiled and searched on the street, whatever. And he wasn't joking, but he wasn't mentioning any color. But in his mind, he knows smarter. He knows that most brown and black people are going to be the ones that are going to be searched. So when he's advocating for that, to me, that's more dangerous to me than him doing an Indian accent or something like that, whatever. So because I was around those kind of comedy world people. I was told behind the scenes, I'm not going to mention who it was because I said I want to take comedy into another direction because I feel like it's either you're either too politically correct and you're being squeaky clean, or you go the opposite direction and you become the super politically incorrect person where you're kind of harping on some of the powerful shit, but you're also amplifying the misogyny, homophobia, racism, and all that kind of stuff. I'm about listen. Let the comedian comedian be able to attempt whatever they're doing and all that kind of stuff, I totally agree that 100%. As a Muslim, I've taken my fair jokes like over and over again. And that's probably why I was like, well, if everyone can make Muslim jokes, then I can make every other kind of fucking joke as well. I think what honestly happened ever since this George in the comedy world, whenever this George Carlin's last special about the owners of the world and it's a big club and you're not in it, I think the comedy world started going, oh, comedy is supposed to be about truth telling and all that kind of stuff. And if you're not a truth teller, then that means you're not doing your job properly. And I think because of that, it's become a whole culture war where now everyone in the comedy world that I used to watch has now shifted into the political atmosphere where now they're showing, like, where now it's like, okay, Nick DiPaolo, I never agree with that guy's, like the way that because he just seems like he really does hate Muslims and he seems like he really does hate black people. But because under the guise of comedy, I'm supposed to take a back seat and not say shit. And I have to like suck up to these guys because they're the ones who control the comedy good boy club. You know what I mean? And then like all these right-leaning comedians will give Hannah Gadsby shit because, oh, she's being serious. You're supposed to be funny. But it's like, I've watched a lot of your comedy heroes in the conservative world, Bill Hicks and all of them, they're like not telling any jokes. They're being serious. So even if you don't agree, listen, Hannah Gadsby is not one of my favorite comedians or any of that, but I respect her ability to come out and talk about being a lesbian and how she feels hurt about certain things and all that. That's her right. And a lot of comedy people are like, well, that's not comedy. You got to do comedy the way I do it. So now people feel pressured who are going to be in the comedy world that if you're not doing the super edgelord jokes, you're not being super politically incorrect, you're no good to everybody. And people act like, oh, and then those same people will act like, oh, I'm being censored. Like people are like, Louis C.K. is censored. Oh my God, he's censored. I don't know, the guy just won a fucking Grammy. Is he censored?
Yeah, no, he's
Is Louis C.K. censored? And then the whole thing is those same people will censor someone like me who wants to call out the industry politics, but they won't ever like acknowledge that. So they keep. This is why comedy to me has kind of fallen short a little bit because now it's just become nonstop culture war. Even though it shouldn't be, comedy should be what's funny. But the reality is, a lot of these motherfuckers in this industry, they politicize shit all the time, and it's always more the right-leaning comics. You know what I mean? Like there's a couple of genuine comics that even though they don't agree with the super woke shit, at least someone like Bill Burr is able to focus on the actual comedy itself. That's why Bill Burr is one of my favorite comedians because to him, the comedy aspect goes first. And he actually is socially thoughtful. He actually gives thought to, because he has a black wife and all that kind of stuff too, right? So he does give social stuff, that thought. So I'm just saying some comedians like that don't want anyone to have a nuanced message even. And that's me experiencing it from talking to Artie Lang behind the scenes and all that, because I've had the same conversation with this guy about where comedy is going. And he even kind of agrees with me on a little bit, but then he'll go back to doing the edgelord shit. And that's why me and him didn't really talk after a while either, because I figured out he was a phony from my experience. In my personal opinion, and I'll leave you guys with that. But you guys, this is a good conversation. It brought a lot out of me. I'm sorry for going on tangents, but this really brings a lot of emotion out of me. But you guys are like, at least you're going to have a really nuanced conversation. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Hansi.
Thank you very much. So that was very interesting. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate the feedback. Absolutely.
I think certainly comedy, but as a culture, it seems like we've begun to politicize everything. So
communication.
And it's whether it's the ways in which we communicate with social media as a predominant way of doing this, whether it's more of a profit motive because this type of politicization can stoke emotion and fear or loyalty and things that really band people together to capture attention, good or bad. And maybe the comedy as a culture is following just what other communities or cultures have been in society. Hansi, if you're still there, I'm curious, and this kind of came up when speaking about William Hung. He's someone I haven't really thought about in a couple decades, and I'm wondering if a William Hung, the phenomena of him could exist today, because yeah, I remember American Idol. He had a song and things like that. But from my memory, like his presentation was a bit atypical. I'm not sure exactly like what it was, but I'm trying to remember. Was he included in the joke, or was he the butt of the joke?
I don't think he was at all.
And Hansi, like I'm ignorant to much of your experience with Howard Stern, but I would ask you the same. Like, did you feel like you were in on it with the Stern show, or were you a character for them to poke at their or at your expense?
Okay, well, the William Hung thing, right? I'll say this: that I think like professional wrestling has its tropes. I think the common trope now that, and I always ranted about this with American Idol and all these reality shows, that the winners of these shows are not going to mean shit, and it's going to be the people that are not fucking good. And I knew that like they made a whole, like not even William Hung, but I always felt bad for like those interviews with Howard Stern and William Hung, and they're like literally just fucking harassing this guy. And I felt really bad for him. Like they're trying to do homoerotic thing to him. He doesn't want to do that. They're giving him shit because his parents are like, you know, are like being very strict with him and all that kind of stuff. Like it came off like a joke, but from my experience, when you feel the rush of Howard Stern calling upon you and giving you 30 minutes on the air, right? When there was one call, one of my most infamous calls was that they started the show by going to me, and they gave me 30 minutes. And the thing is, I listened to the show, and it was more like, okay, if I want to be a part of this world in the comedy world, I gotta take these jokes because the great Howard Stern is paying attention to me. He knows me. He's laughing at my personality and all that. You feel that high. And this is why I relate to wrestlers, because it's kind of like Vince McMahon, Howard Stern, Lorne Michaels, all these guys are like the Tony Sopranos of their world, where you got to go into their world, and then if you don't get get to put like I felt like I gave enough work as a character-wise that I should have been allowed to go and do red carpet interviews. And then Howard wanted me to like basically beg for it. It's like, well, I don't think you're mentally well enough to do that. I'm like, give me a break. So like that would break me down. And when one of your heroes is like telling you you're not good enough, then you just lose your mind. And I became, I started feeling something happening in my real life, that the show was affecting me. I thought the show was really fucking with me. You know what I mean? I think that my personal opinion, I'm not saying that this is true or not, but I felt like there were organizing ways for me to keep calling in, even if I didn't want to call in, because if his fan base keeps harassing you over and over again, and there's been a lot of people on that show that would try to leave, and then they'll be forced to call back in because, oh, like you're getting too harassed, and then he'll get on the air and go to you, oh, I don't know why you're calling in. So like that would make you feel like very fucking, you know, demoralized, and I would feel like a shitty person. And I became a shittier person because of the stuff that he would do. Like people give him props for when Chris Canyon came on and talk about being openly gay and all that. People don't realize that after that one segment, Howard Stern went to the lowest brow material. It's like, oh, you're gay, so you want to do some homoerotic stuff, where he's trying to get the guy to grab, like, you know, Sal and Richard's pouch and all that kind of stuff. So it's like you say you respect gay people and you respect Muslims and black people, but yet you go to the lowest brow humor because that's like your fraternity type of shit that I'm not into. And I'm telling you that those kind of homoerotic like initiation they put you through, it kind of made me a little bit more homophobic, because I didn't know how to explain like a corporate guy like Howard Stern, who, you know, does that kind of homoerotic stuff and making you feel uncomfortable about it. I lumped that all in with the LGBTQ community, and for the last decade or so, I had to live with that and reflect upon myself to see where I went wrong, whatever. Because sometimes, you know what I mean. But to answer your question, I'm sorry for going on again about this, but it just, yeah, no, you're right though. Like, you know, like I felt like demoralized a little bit, but at the same time, being on the air, getting airtime, people knowing who I am, you get a high from that, and you want to amplify this psychotic character, and then you basically live your gimmick, basically. And that's what I understood. Now I know how wrestlers end up living their gimmick, especially if you're like being amped up as this character. You're going to keep living this character, and then you're not going to give a shit about being politically correct or having the right thought. You're going to be like, fuck everyone else. Howard Stern said fuck the world, so I'm going to do the same thing as well. Wait, I apologize for stepping back in again, man.
No, I invited you. And we appreciate you sharing your experience, dude.
Thank you, Hansi. Let's go to some. Let's go to some more phone calls here. We go to Brandon from New Jersey. Brandon, welcome to the show. If he's there, going once, going twice.
Hello.
Hey, Brandon. How you doing?
Hello.
Good.
Hi.
Great to talk to you. Man, I don't know how to follow that up, but yeah. No, I mean, I use humor a lot, especially on Twitter, and I have.
Really?
I don't know. I guess my humor is kind of. I love using pictures as humor, like gifs and whatnot. Wade knows this, and Jordan. I could be a bit annoying when it comes to that, but I don't know. To me, certain objects like that make I get. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but that type of humor, visual humor, I don't know. It's kind of my bag. Like, what do you think about that visual humor, like pictures or? To get your, like to you, like to me personally, it's funny, but to the person interpreted it, it could mean something else. What do you think about that?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, interpretation is a big part of humor, and I'd say like part of the risk, right? You can post something or say something with one intent, and then it's received in a completely different way. That's one of the real challenges and tricks of all comedy. I mean, comedy can take place in many forms: pictures, text, voice, or whatever. But yeah, I find that on Twitter in particular. I'm not a big Twitter user. I'm more an observer, I would say. But yeah, you might post something thinking like, oh, this is going to be really funny. And then some people might agree and others might say like, what are you doing? And it can get confusing. I think about intention a lot and just the relationship between putting something out into the world that you think is funny and then watching what happens and then seeing sometimes people say, that was funny, I agree. And others are like, what are you doing? They're either confused. I'd say when they're confused, that's like the best case scenario. The worst is like, I'm furious with you. What have you done to my life? Yeah.
What I find funny about like Brandon's online interactions are, I get a kick out of the joy he experiences from the awkwardness of the reactions that I might give or the audience might give or other people might give. I'm laughing at his laughter at himself.
I would say on that note, yeah, comedy is a thrill. I think people go for the joke, and I speak for myself as well, is that it's thrilling. There's something exciting about it. It's like maybe similar to what gamblers feel when they roll the dice. I don't know. It's like, what's going to happen? There's a thrill to it. And I think there's an addictive, almost narcotic quality sometimes to engaging in humor, to producing jokes or doing whatever, just trying to have fun. And yeah, because the payoff can be great. I mean, people who enjoy it really like it. It makes life worthwhile. But yeah, anyways.
Like if I get a reaction from like Jordan or Way or John or something like that, it makes my day. It really does. Like the most absurd of pictures or gifs. If one of them pops, or if anyone pops that I know,
it's fun. Honestly, in some ways, like comedy is just fun. That's why I think people do it for that reason more than anything. It's just fun.
It's playful.
Yes, playful and fun. Yeah.
Like you can send Way the most ridiculous picture at 2 a.m. in the morning, and he'll respond in kind, and that makes
because I'm as sick as you are, Brandon. Like I get the reason I respond to all of your things is because I think it's ridiculous myself. That the act of me responding to you is what makes me laugh. So,
sorry, I feel a lot of it. So Brandon is, I guess, a regular Post listener, contributor. He's part of the fan community in a big way. Is that what you're saying, Way?
Yes,
I don't know Brandon at this point. So
very much so. I would say everybody in here is pretty much it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brandon, yes.
I got one more thing.
Last thing,
like workshopping a joke too. Like I was gonna tweet something out, and I didn't know if it was gonna be offensive or not. And I asked in a group chat and then another group chat, I asked if this joke would. If it would be all right, would it be offensive? And what do you think about that? Like workshopping jokes, if it's gonna cause a stir or you just put it
Workshopping
away.
a joke. What's wrong with that? Like, isn't that what all the greats do? Like, isn't that the act of stand-up
No, I
comedy?
mean, like, if you're gonna say something stupid, you want your peers to say, "Look, this is not gonna go over well. Like, don't do it." Or
yeah, it's feedback. Well, Jerry Seinfeld has a line about stand-up where he says, "The audience is your editor." Meaning, like, go up there, say what you have in mind, and see what happens. I mean, that's different from Twitter, granted, but it's the same sort of thing. I mean, yeah, bouncing something off a person is a great way to find out if there's any real humor value to it. And some might think it's really funny, as others might not. But yeah, you kind of, it's hard to tell what is objectively funny until you put it out in the world in some fashion. So yeah, I'd say it's an important part of the process. If your goal is to figure out like what is funny to a lot of people, then you have to expose the humor to human beings and see how they react. And
are you going to do a stand-up act soon, Brandon?
I mean, I've done it before. I've done open mics and stuff like that, and I mean, it's mixed results. And but it's a pretty cool adrenaline rush to do it. Actually,
yeah, no, it's like skydiving or something. It's like you want to do it again. Yeah.
I found it very freeing when I did it, like 5 years ago. So you never know.
Brandon,
thanks, guys.
Brandon, I feel before you go, or just go, and I'll just talk about you lovingly, perhaps. But I certainly feel a kinship with you. I enjoy you quite much, and a lot of it. I enjoy
you as well, Jordan. I think you're a brilliant man.
I appreciate that, and I think we have a similar sense of humor in.
Absolutely.
There's an absurdity we enjoy. There's a trolling aspect to our personality at times. And look, I want to give you credit. I remember maybe a year or more ago in one of Braden and Davey's Twitch chat rooms. You made a joke about a wrestler that I'm friends with, and I actually took offense to it. And I told you that in the chat, and you respected it. But like, I didn't hold that against you. I didn't that didn't paint you in a negative light in my mind, because I understand that to be funny often is you're making attempts. And again, every attempt isn't going to land. And look, if I wasn't friends with that performer, I probably wouldn't have even noticed the joke. So I just took a personal offense because of my relationship to the person that was being made fun of. But like, the fact that you're like, I know your intentions, you know, I don't believe it's in the spirit of being mean. And like, it's fun. And look, sometimes when we play on the playground, we scrape our knee. Sometimes when we play on the playground, like a kid's gonna cry because something goes wrong. And I think that can be okay as long as we're able to be intentional about taking care of the community, especially the times in which maybe we may step out of bounds, perhaps, you know, depending on who feels that way. But Brandon, yeah, like, keep being funny. Like, we need that. And I know I certainly need that for myself.
Thank you,
guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you too, dude.
Hey, let's go to, I believe this is Jordan, another Jordan.
Oh shit.
Did I get your first name right? Because it only says Jay here.
Yes, that's my professional name. So when I'm on Zoom, you know, it's Jay Yates, but
got it.
It is Jordan.
Jordan Yates, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very fascinating discussion in comedy. And I believe you guys touched on the society part. Within the last few years, I've been noticing that people are a lot more sensitive, a lot more sensitive than they were back when we were young lads running around on the streets.
Or is it the fact that we just have more communication tools for people to, you know, people who might not like something have a bigger microphone or megaphone these days than they did back then?
That is something I never even thought of. So thank you.
That's certainly possible. Perhaps also as a society, maybe some of us feel a bit more comfortable or a bit permission to express how we're feeling.
Yeah, and we're maybe just more aware of, like, you know, other people's opinions now than we were perhaps back then.
Oh, there's so much more communication with social media. I mean, it's incredibly easy to share and post a thought. Like, no time in human history has been easier to just articulate a thought, either in voice or in text, put it on the internet, and distribute it around the world. And so, yeah, we're hearing from a lot more people than ever before. And I think that's part of what leads to the sensitivities, because we're peering into each other's worlds, I would say, a lot more than any time in the past.
And also, the ones that are going to communicate publicly are typically the ones with the most courage or audacity or the strongest opinion. And thus, that's typically all that we see when we're consuming only the thoughts or the opinions or the feelings of those brave enough to share. And so when we take that in, perhaps we erroneously just think that, well, that's the general consensus now as a population. Jordan, I got to ask, I'm looking at your profile picture. Are you a stand-up comedian?
I did one set, and that was an amateur night on 2 days' notice. I filled in for somebody.
So with 2 days' notice and your first time, like, what's the approach?
The approach was I did a joke about social media and about mental health, and combining the two. I said something to the effect of, I post on social media once every 4 months, and whenever I post, my whole family goes awry. Like, oh my God, he's out of hibernation type of thing.
Yeah.
Where's the joke?
I can detect. Well, I can just detect the humor value in it. I think you're saying that your family wasn't sure if you were still around, and then you post on social media and it's like, oh yeah, he's still with us or something. That's kind of, no, I get the gist of the joke. And that's the thing, like the jokes can be told in so many different ways. And part of the fun, I think, of the construction of it is just trying to figure out how to better arrange it or articulate it. I've got a lot of ideas in my head where it's like, I don't even know how to say that properly yet. But no, I get what you're saying. I get the gist of the joke. And I think there's something there for sure.
And Jordan, to answer your question, I have done improv, and it was through my improv that I got to do a first-time stand-up routine.
Very cool. I've never done, I guess, a quote-unquote more formal improv, but in the absurdity of a global pandemic, I found myself going live on Instagram weekly. Wai Ting was a guest of that. In what, at least for me, that's the only really public organized type of comedy I ever attempted without realizing that's what I was doing. But it's a thrill, and especially the live aspect of it, and the tightrope act of this may not work. And at least for me, it was quite fun.
I would say actually improv is more welcoming to newer people because it's sort of more of a group activity. I haven't done a ton of it, but there's a Second City here in Toronto. I've participated in a few things there. And by contrast to stand-up, it's a more of like a fun group activity. Stand-up is kind of brutal. I'm not the first to say that. Like, you're going up alone in front of a room full of people you probably don't know. And a lot of them will have their arms crossed, either literally or figuratively. And they're like, make me laugh. And it's tough to do sometimes. So, but yeah, improv is, if someone's looking to get involved in any sort of performed comedy for mental health or just even fun reasons, I'd say improv is an easier in. But there's a big debate within comedy about stand up and improv, and they're two very separate camps in many ways. That's a whole other topic, but no.
Thank you so much, Jordan Yates, for the phone call. Let's go up next to Jake. Jake from the Windy City. What are your thoughts on the topic?
Hey guys, Jordan and Wai, good to talk. Good to hear from you, and Eli, incredible insight from you today. So,
thank you.
It's great to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
I really thank you for that. It's been great to be a part of this. I'm so glad that I was invited.
Absolutely, really appreciate it. One specific genre, I'm really happy that you guys are talking about this. One specific subgenre of comedy that I'm curious to get your guys' take on is late night. The late night talk show that's been around for over half a century. For me as a broadcasting student, look, Conan O'Brien, I've grew up watching Conan O'Brien on late night at the 11:35. The 11:35 slot here and 12:35 in the Eastern time zone on NBZ. And me as a broadcasting student, I always love the way he handles himself on guest interviews. And he is one of four major influences for me in college studying broadcasting. It's John Pollock, Wai Ting, Ryan Seacrest, and Conan O'Brien. So
cool. You're in a cool company. Yeah, this is amazing.
I want to get your thoughts on, because like obviously in most of the 20th century, there was two guys who monopolized the entire late night genre, which is David Letterman and Johnny Carson. To me, Johnny, watching reruns of his show on Antenna TV on a channel here, he's still the gold standard, the king of late night. But watching right now, with this amalgamation of late night talk shows throughout now, with Colbert, I think Stephen Colbert is my favorite now, and Jimmy Fallon's all right, and Jimmy Kimmel, he's still kicking it. So it's still a great lineup, as well as Trevor Noah on the Daily Show. I just want to get your thoughts on maybe like the current landscape, or do you guys watch it all right now, or do they do? Yeah.
So as some of our listeners know, I was recently in LA and I actually got tickets to see Jimmy Kimmel. So I got to go, and for me, it was really interesting to contrast that experience with my prior experience, also on the same trip, going to several stand-up comedy shows at like the Laugh Factory and also the what was that place called? The Comedy Store.
Right.
I was really struck by how authentic one experience was, and how completely manufactured the other was. And of course, I'm speaking about, the process of going to a late night talk show where you're, working in television. Like, this is nothing really new to me, but like the idea that all of these things exist in comedy, and one is strictly the purity of a man with a microphone speaking in front of an audience, making them laugh, organically creating jokes on the spot in many cases. Harlan Williams made fun of my glasses. Like, how great was that? But then going to Jimmy Kimmel and like having everything be so kind of perfectly timed, jokes like pre-planned. Jimmy Kimmel, like the first time you see him, you don't even see him at the start. It's like a warm-up act. And then Jimmy Kimmel comes on as they start rolling. He doesn't even wait for the applause to end. He just goes into the jokes. He's reading off a prompter, boom, 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 commercial break. And then he it's like, it's so cookie cutter and so manufactured. And I understand why it has to be, because he has to do it every single day for 20 plus years. There's no way, you can spend time interacting with every single person. This is all to say that they're very different things. On camera, I completely understand why one exists and why the other doesn't exist that way, but it's not for me. The live TV talk shows, to me, they're promotional vehicles. Occasionally you might get, a great nugget of like entertainment, but it's more of a produced TV show than I would say pure comedy.
I would say, building on that, I would say late night has changed a lot over the last 10 years, especially. I will say, I am also a huge Conan fan. I watched a lot of the 12:35 show, the Late Night with Conan O'Brien, when I was in high school, university. He was very formative to my own sensibilities, the absurdity that he brings. I know he recently wrapped up his show and now does a podcast primarily. But yeah, Conan was a huge influence on me. I thought he was great. I liked Letterman a little bit too, although I feel like I sort of arrived like when he was near the end of his career and kind of like very openly sick of it. My memory of watching Letterman like on the CBS show is like, Paul, how you doing? It almost didn't seem like you really wanted to be there too much. But no, I respect him.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, no, Conan I think is fantastic. But yeah, no, the format of late night, it's interesting. I feel like it's in a weird spot right now because there's things like podcasts, there's things like what we're doing now. There's so many productions out there that can kind of directly compete with what they do, and I suspect that's part of why people like Kimmel and Fallon and all that have gone just to like, well, we'll just have celebrities on and talk about their upcoming project or whatever. And I almost feel like late night is strayed a little bit from doing the pure comedy stuff, say in the style that Conan did. It's now more about like, let's talk about what's going on in the news. That's a lot of the jokes are news based. Whereas remember, a lot of Conan jokes were not news based. They were just absurd things like, one of his famous characters was a masturbating bear. And things like that, and didn't have anything to do with what was going on in the headlines. And amongst other things. So I feel like, late night is now, I think they've almost responded to the landscape and maybe almost kind of ceded ground a little bit in terms of pure comedy to maybe like the podcast world. Because I mean, I myself as a comedy fan, there's a lot of comedy podcasts out there that are very well done, very professional, posting very frequently. So there's plenty of places to get laughs, to get current comedy. And I think late night kind of realizes that. And the networks have probably said like, well, what can we focus on from here? Let's bring on celebrities because we're in New York City, we're in Hollywood. Let's just more focus on that. But there's still fun segments that obviously occur on the shows. I admit I don't catch them as much. I usually have to be like told of a clip or something. I'm not a regular watcher at this point, but someone might say like, oh, Colbert did something funny or Kimmel did something funny, check it out. And I find it that way. But at late night, the format I think has changed because we're just in a whole new media world right now.
All right, let's go up next to Chris Elliott. Chris, thank you for joining the show. Welcome to the Wellness Policy.
Good evening, everybody. How we doing?
Hello.
Hey, Chris.
Doing well.
Doing all right.
Good. Comedy for me, it's always been like a therapeutic thing for me. I always remember like as a kid, and I'd get bullied about one thing or another, and it was my mum always said to me, "They're looking for a reaction. Try and laugh with it. Try and smile, or just don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction." And from then on, it was always like I would always try and like crack a joke about something or about myself. So it was almost as if using what the bullies were saying and kind of like self-deprecating humor. And I think that's something for me that I've always found helpful is if you're able to laugh at yourself, then you can kind of put up with a lot of stuff that you might not necessarily be able to put up with otherwise. And I think that ability to do that's helped me be able to progress to where I am now, where I can even now, even if it's nothing to do with like bullying, but even now it's like I'll always try and like find a joke or crack a joke about something, or whether the success of the joke is whether the joke is good or not, but 9 times out of 10 they're not. But it's always something that I've kind of tended towards now, is just cracking jokes for the sake of cracking jokes.
It sounds like it was like, a form of like protection that you managed to find for yourself. Maybe much in the way that I can relate to, like, if somebody were to crack a joke about Asians on TV and being able to just strictly laugh at it. I'm kind of curious, like, I mean, obviously it's kind of helped comfort you, but did it have any effects on your overall confidence, or were you able to look elsewhere for your self-confidence?
I mean, my confidence is I've never been particularly self-confident, and I think that kind of helped me. Like, the self-deprecating humor to get through those situations. I think I was able to crack those jokes, or to say those jokes, because I wasn't overly self-confident, and in a way, it was almost as if me doing that was to say to the people on the outside, hey, I'm confident, I'm able to do this and I'm able to do that. So it was like insinuating confidence that wasn't necessarily there.
Yeah, like perhaps reclaiming some of the power back from those people. It makes sense. And it brings up it kind of ties us back to, earlier in the conversation, just the many different roles that humor can play, and the ways in which it can be protective or defensive, or bonding, or help us feel good or more powerful or better about ourselves or not. And for those listening, perhaps it's can be a healthy exercise when we're engaging in these different ways to check ourselves and to maybe ask, what is the use of this right now? And for humor, but many ways in which we interact and engage in life. But just taking a moment to ask, like, what is this serving right now? How is this helping, or perhaps how is this not helping? And there's no need to judge or criticize these things, but even just the practice of a more objective self-awareness at least gives us a bit more access to maybe be more intentional about the ways in which we want to engage personally and interpersonally with other people.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to say as well. I think self-deprecating humor can also, especially in like a bullying situation, or if you're up against people who are making fun of you, it can kind of take the weapon away, meaning that like you made fun of yourself, and now they have nothing to say. And I probably used that tactic when I was younger myself. And it can help smooth over the situation and kind of neutralize it in a weird way. I think that's probably part of the tactic, and
I think it's really smart. And I mean, maybe that act in and of itself like shows a great ability and confidence within anybody who's able to use it to diffuse a situation smart, using your smarts rather than using fists or something else. So
and it also shows the bully or the attacker, whomever, that you can't be hurt. It's like that you sort of it'll bounce off you, and a lot of people will give up at that point because they're like, oh, I can't get through this guy. I wanted him to be mad at me, but he's making a joke out of it, and that's no fun for me as a bully. Is what the bully is thinking.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your contributions as always. Let's go to our last phone call of the day. We go to Asher. Asher, please unmute yourself. Welcome to the Wellness Policy.
Hi, Wei. Hi, Jordan. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Asher.
Hello,
What's up, Asher.
I first want to say that this show is awesome, and it really brings to mind one of my favorite wellness policy shows about the importance of play.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Because that's what we do. Like, that's one way to understand humor. Like, you're letting your imagination run free, and there's a lot of power in that. And I think everyone touched on that today. There's a lot of power in that. It's just very empowering. And I want to build off of what the previous person said. I'm not sure if it's Jake.
Chris, you mean the last caller or prior to that?
About self-deprecated humor.
Chris, yes.
Oh, that was Chris. Sorry, Chris. So I think that another way to look at it is doing something that is subversive. Comedy can help you really trick the audience into accepting something before they fully understand it. There's some suspension of disbelief. Sacha Baron Cohen comes to mind. Also MJF. I want to talk about Young Rock.
Okay.
And I'll take 2 minutes because I know you talked about
Eli, Young Rock is a show about Dwayne Johnson's. It's sort of a dramatized biopic comedy type of thing on NBC.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Okay, great.
Yeah, please go on.
So, what I want to say about Young Rock, and I know you and John Wei talked about it a lot, and I've heard your opinions. I want to use it as an example for what we're talking about. Because I agree with you guys that as a sitcom, it's not a very sophisticated product. Most of the jokes, it's a network sitcom, most of the jokes are really boring. They feel tired. But at the same time, the premise is basically a political campaign. The man is calling his shot. He's going to run for president in 2022. And he can say that because it's a comedy. It's I'm just kidding, No one said I'm running for president, but at the same time, every episode.
So you like it because you think it's a man this is the start of his political campaign?
I think it's pretty clear. It's very obvious that he's using the platform of an accessible NBC sitcom to tell the world, listen, he's probably going to run. He's probably going to run in 2032. This is very clear. He's calling his shot, and alongside the bad jokes and the bad acting, you are getting a lot of bold, subversive messages about him being able to take responsibility for his mistake, unlike our former president. He's apologizing to the people of Philadelphia for desecrating Philly steak sandwich. It sounds like a stupid premise for an episode, but it's basically, I can say sorry. I can be a leader who takes ownership of their own mistake. So it's very sophisticated because it's layered. There's like the humor is very basic, but it's brilliant at the same time because it's very accessible and hence subversive.
So you believe Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is using the vehicle of comedy as a way to get people to like him en masse prior to running for president?
I see what he's saying. I've seen most of the first season, so I understand the construction. And I'm not going to lie, I've had similar thoughts. We've seen far more ridiculous things play out in U.S. politics in recent history. So if that were to be the case, I can't say I'd be completely shocked.
I've heard rumors of The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Like I remember, because I work in the news, and I feel like I've handled content like that I either hinted at it on Instagram or something. You might know more about this than I do.
I might be mistaken, Eli, but I think they wanted him to run in the last primaries, but he refused because he supported Kamala.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, but there was some legitimacy to the idea. Like it's something that could happen potentially. Like that's been floated as a possibility.
Oh, it's going to happen. We're all going to vote for him.
I'm Canadian, but yeah, I go for it.
I can smell what he's cooking.
Yeah, I get it. That will definitely be pulled out at certain stump speeches for sure.
Thank you, Asher. Thank you for the contribution as always, and thank you everybody who called us. We are, as always, seem to go over time whenever we have topics that seemingly encourage a lot of thoughts and a lot of conversations. And this was I don't know how great of a job we did. I think you guys did a great job, but this is such a broad topic that I feel like we've only barely scratched the surface of. Like imagine trying to spend an hour and a half talking about like an emotion, a feeling.
Oh yeah.
And it's very difficult, but I want to thank you. Of course, I want to thank Sarah, Jordan, as always, for helping us navigate this conversation, and everybody who called in. So, Eli, where can people find more of you?
Yeah, I'm not terribly active on social media right now, and I probably should be, especially since I'm doing things like this now. I just want to say, first of all, thank you again, Wai, and thank you to Jordan for having me on. It was an honor and a lot of fun, very interesting. I would totally be willing to do something like this again down the line if you wanted to revisit the topic. That's something I think about a lot, as Wai knows. So in terms of social media stuff, I don't have a lot active at the moment, but one thing I was telling Wai about, so I currently work as a news professional here in Canada, and I have thought a lot over the years about how to sort of connect more with the public about what it's like to work in the news business, the nature of the news business, sort of behind the scenes a little bit, without giving too much away. I'm not looking to get personal or to certainly deal with names or anything like that. I just wanted to sort of do some public outreach, I guess, as a news professional. And with that in mind, I've started a YouTube channel that has absolutely nothing on it as of right now, called Ask a News Worker. And I've sent a link to Wai that he'll probably put in the description at some point. And again, I have nothing up there right now. I'm going to start building it. It'll be me, just to begin with, talking about am I on CP24? I'm not on CP24 as of yet. I've known people involved with the CP24, but I'm not involved with CP24 at this point. But yeah, I just, over the years, having worked in the business for over 10 years now, I've encountered a lot of conversations in my private life where people are very curious about what it's like to work in news, what goes on, how does the news get made, how does it come about? And I just realized, I think there's, without sounding too much of a businessman about it, it sounds like there's a market out there. There's curiosity, there's interests that I've detected just in my private life. So I thought maybe it's time to make some sort of channel that addresses that. What type of news do I cover? General news, national, international, mostly hard stuff. So really serious, depressing things for the most part. But yeah, so I have this channel that I'm just getting started called Ask a News Worker. If anyone listening right now is curious about it, you're free to follow the link and look for content. City TV, sorry, Brandon from New Jersey.
He's interacting. Audio listeners, he's interacting with the chat room right now, and people have a ton of questions.
Yeah,
you're not here to ask the news worker in the chat room, everybody. You got to go to the YouTube to ask the news worker. So you can find the link in the show description.
Yes, exactly. So that's what one project I'm gonna be doing from here, and just seeing where it goes again. And I encourage people to ask me questions. That's the name of the channel, Ask a News Worker. If there's something you wanted to know about what it's like to work in the news business, I would try to answer it as honestly as I can, again, without revealing too much sensitive information or whatever. I want to keep it as fun as I can. I don't want it to be too dour, but it's informational. It's again, I look at it as like a public outreach thing. Like, I know there's people out there who have questions about how the news works. We're surrounded by it more than ever. You know, it's in our lives all the time. And I know there's curiosity about, how does this work? How does that work? And this is just my opinion too, full disclosure. I don't know everything. I only know what I've experienced and what I've seen. So I'm not the final word at all. My hope is that if the channel were to grow and get attention, I could bring on people with their own experiences and talk about what they've been through. It seems like a space that can be explored. So I'm going to be doing that.
Thank you, Eli. What about you, Jordan? Where can people catch more of your stuff this week? This
is what I'll promote. And I'm very excited about this. We had our guest Jackson Stone, a pro wrestler, a couple months ago. And he talked about his nonprofit in which he is helping to connect and build community around issues concerning mental health, specifically for other pro wrestlers and those working within the industry. And he's invited me to join one of their continuing, programs live on Zoom. So I know that there are pro wrestlers and others working within pro wrestling who listen to the wellness policy. So Wednesday, June 22nd at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be offering some sort of presentation on meditation and mindfulness more generally. I'd imagine there would be some people interested in my experiences within the industry at Ring of Honor, more from a branding or communications perspective. So anything is on the table for that. But on Twitter, if you want to get more information and to sign up to get the Zoom link, at You Are Loved Life on Twitter. And again, that's Wednesday, June 22nd. And I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be an interesting conversation. And I don't know, I think it's cool that engaging with you, Wai, a bit more publicly around these topics is leading to an opportunity like this. And, I'm not really pushing for much specific, but it's been an interesting journey to see where the intersection between pro wrestling and mental health is certainly leading me from day to day.
Without a doubt, yeah, it's been fun for me as well, and a great excuse for me to bring my friends onto the show as well. So, thank you, Eli. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everybody listening.
Thank you.
We will be back, I think, relatively earlier next month, right? What is the date here? Let me just see very quickly. About June 16th is when we'll be back. So, tune in then. Thank you for listening, and until later, we need a sign off for this. Jordan, you got something?
Oh, okay. You ready for it?
Yeah.
Bye-bye.